Back with another edition of my NFL 2022 Exit Report series. This one, little complication during the day. So I thank my guest today, Kiev O'Neil from the Odds Breakers, of bearing with me. A little power outage in very rainy Los Angeles. Welcome to weather on the West Coast. And today's the Arizona Cardinals. Kiev, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, man. It's funny. It's like football just ended, but here we are again talking about football, But you know what? I love football, and it's been my favorite sport since I was a kid. And I don't mind talking about it at all, And I think it's important to get a grasp upon, what we perceived this year from what we expected, and try to make a decision on, what we might need to change in our processes.
Yeah, process is important. It's fresh in our minds right now because the season just ended, and it doesn't matter whether you were really on with the team or off with the team. I really like to recap all that I went through, step by step. What were my keys? Did they come through? Why did I make a play? Did it work by luck? Did it work because I was ahead of the game? And that's really what this is about. And if you talk, starting up with Arizona a year ago, it was a very weird vibe a year ago, 11-6. If you would have said that the Cardinals were 11-6 in 2021, you'd have said, wow, what a great year. And yet by the end of the year, the way they got humiliated in the playoff game and lost 5 of their last 6, people were saying, same old Cardinals, they choked down the stretch, nothing went right. 11-6 completely forgotten. As somebody who lives right there with Arizona, what was the vibe at the end of last year?
The end of last year was disappointment. You're talking about the end of 22. I mean, it's
21,
just so.
Yeah.
20. Well, it ended in 22, I guess. Yeah. I know you're. That choke at the end, like you just mentioned, was awful. I mean, they're going to thinking that they're going to be the 1 seed in the playoffs. To it was this their true colors this whole time? I think it was a little bit of catching some teams off guard. A little Kyler Murray, very, very good on his legs the first 8-9 games there, and you know how it is. It's almost like when you're capping a game. If the team's not used to the other team, anything can really happen, and it's hard to game plan if you're not ready to know what to expect. Well, that's kind of what happened. They hit some people in the mouths. They had some very good receivers. Obviously Hopkins got hurt at the end of the year a little bit. Kind of seems to be the ongoing theme with him. But it was massive disappointment. And then as soon as they played the Rams again in the playoffs, they played them almost back to back. They got destroyed. Couldn't even compete in that game. It was. I felt sorry for Murray. That offensive line was just so bad, and Aaron Donald was having a field day. Murray just had a split second to throw the ball. They couldn't even get a receiver open, and they were playing press coverage, and they didn't need to worry about getting beat over the top because there was no time to throw over the top. So it was just the perfect storm against the Cardinals.
Yeah, and that kind of sums it up. Him and where was it? Von Miller last year too, when the Rams rented him. It was just too much for the Arizona offensive line.
Floyd as well. Floyd and Von Miller was the late addition. That was just like, holy cow. I mean, the Rams were stacked. It's just amazing what you see in this division from what happened this year. I mean, if you would have told me that the Seattle Seahawks were going to outperform the Rams, I would have said, you're crazy. What are you doing in this industry? But it's pretty much what happened.
Yeah. So back to the drawing board for the Cardinals last year. And instead of net pluses, I saw them losing roster people last year in March and free agency. They lose Christian Kirk. They lose Chandler Jones. They lose Akeem Hicks. The defense, which I thought, Steve Keim, he got them some good players, but I just didn't like the way they were being coached. And now they had less talent than they had before. And then they go in the draft. Of course, they make that big move for another wide receiver, which Marquise Brown. That really helps them, knowing that Hopkins was going to miss 6 games at the beginning of the year. But it did cost them their number 1 draft pick. Their second draft pick, they use on a very good tight end, McBride, but that's 2 straight picks for the offense. by the time they got around to the defense, I graded this draft. If you don't count Brown, I gave this draft a pretty low grade, and if you do count Brown, it was still pretty much average. I thought they lost ground. Did you have any impressions on what they did or what they left on the table on draft day heading into preseason?
Everything. They did everything that the Bears have done for the last 40 years, build around the trenches. And I've seen this coming, and I've been a massive critic of Steve Keim because I'm like, you're listening to demands from Kyler Murray to get more playmakers. And what does it matter if you have 5 DeAndre Hopkins on your team if you don't even have a second to throw it to him, And what do you get when you have a perfect storm of a running quarterback with no offensive line? Well, you get injured. It just opens them up for that. So they completely left the trenches wide open. Why the heck are you going for Marquise Brown? Because they played together in college? Is that it? They saw Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase do it, right? So that was probably, their thought process with Hopkins with the dirty piss test, obviously, and, not being able to play those first 4 to 6 games. I think it was 6 games. But, they thought that they can work the same magic. But obviously they were in a worse position than the Bengals certainly were. If you remember, the Bengals, didn't exactly have the greatest season when they went to the Super Bowl. They kind of, a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Now they won the division without having to try that last game against Cleveland. But just because the rest of the teams were in disarray, then they, kind of got lucky a little bit against the Titans and were able to make a push. So, they're comparing themselves to that. They still didn't have that offensive line that they needed. But not only that, they didn't have the defense because the Bengals defense was a heck of a lot better than the Cardinals defense. The Chandler Jones thing, I mean, he was their best pass rusher. I mean, you didn't want to pay him, and I get it, but he did take some games off every once in a while. But you get J.J. Watt, who's another kind of a flashy defensive end, but his stuff's only going to work if you can stop the run a little bit and force people back on their heels. He's one player, and it's almost like he was playing with a bunch of guys that just some didn't belong in the NFL. Budda Baker's getting older. I don't like the middle linebacking crew. I mean, it's just it was just a perfect storm. It's like they can get run all over the place. The trenches were horrible, so they did the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Not only do you lose money paying for all those skill positions, they can't do nothing. You ruined your team. Ready to start over.
Kingsbury, he's always been known as an offensive strategist. And philosophically, as I've covered the draft and I've covered these teams for decades, I always say if your strength is offense, then you better draft for where your weakness is. Because philosophically, I thought they should have done as much as they could defensively, because that's the area that Kingsbury's not proficient in. He could scheme probably and get some points out of the offense with lesser personnel. And you're right, they went kind of skilled position heavy as opposed to going where they needed to go to clear up the trenches, get off the field on third down, and do all those things. And that leads into my keys. I'm going to list 3 keys, and then you can comment on them and then add your own. This is what I put on my August sheets right before the season, and I revisit them all during the year. My first key: defensive concerns remain, just what we talked about. The draft didn't do anything for me. They lost 2 guys on the front 7. I didn't see how the defense was going to be better. My second key, and this is kind of what I look at in terms of hidden value, there was expected negative variance from the turnover ratio. And I'm going to save that little tease a little bit. This is something, interestingly enough, if you remember, we talked about when we were on a show together about 10 months ago, when we talked about Pythagorean theorem and some of those other things. This is going to come into play. Variance that I thought the Cardinals were going to be weaker. And then the third area I had was concern with the sack ratio. Those 2 guys were down. What did they do with the offensive line? They didn't do really anything with the offensive line because they concentrated on tight end and wide receiver. We know Murray runs kind of a schoolyard game, that to me draws it up in the sand. And then if you don't catch him, boom, it's a 30, 40-yard touchdown. But we're not throwing on timing. We're not throwing on rhythm. We're running around, and he's elusive and scary enough that he can pull games out at the end. But these are my three things that either bothered me or they were going to have to overcome in order to meet or exceed my expectations. Thoughts and any additional concerns you had?
I'm looking at my preview right now that I write up, because I write up a preview on every division, a good paragraph or two summarized. It's like summarize my thoughts on it. And I wrote 14 opponent fumbles while losing only 4. So they gained 14, only lost 4. That fumble luck was a massive regressor. Unfortunately, I don't have that in my equation as much as maybe I should for my season win totals. A lot of people do season win totals by their power rating and then use a percentage of, win expectancy and add them all together at the end, right? That's a very popular way people do it. I do it a little different in the NFL. But I should have accounted for it more, because the reason that I had about 8.5 wins, which was the ring total, I had 8.7, was because I expected regression a little bit from the Rams, being it was a Super Bowl hangover. And I expected Seattle to be terrible. And I was also just not sold on Trey Lance at San Francisco. Well, apparently Trey Lance didn't matter. Apparently the Rams did exactly what they were supposed to do. But unfortunately, Seattle was a formidable team for a long time. And Geno Smith became the most, I would say, improved player. He won the comeback player of the year, which I don't understand, I guess, the meaning of that award still. But I think you nailed it, really, just by saying that. I thought the Marquise Brown trade was terrible, as I mentioned. From a scheduling perspective, I feel like their schedule was just a little bit harder in some ways than I expected it to be. They were supposed to have, I believe, a third place schedule last year, right? I think they're third.
I believe they were third. No, I think they might have even been second.
Okay,
I'll have to double check that with San Francisco.
Yeah, it was them or the Niners, but their schedule kind of ended up a little bit tougher than I expected. But either way, it was all the trenches for me, because they weren't able to, build from the foundation up. And that's why I always, being a Bears fan, I always complained about, I'm like, doesn't matter if you get Cutler, doesn't matter that you got this flashy Khalil Mack to get the sacks. It doesn't matter. You get a good receiver like Brandon Marshall. It's like, if you don't build from up, you're not going to have time to do anything. And then your defense is just going to get tired the whole rest of the game when you get the ball pounded on you. Well, that's what's going to happen to Arizona. Now, the question is, can they do anything to fix it in the future? I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, almost a teaching moment with the fumbles, because that was the hidden gem. You nailed it. Fumbles are random. Interceptions, not quite as much random, because you have risk takers in the secondary. You have great pass rushes that give the quarterback less time to throw. They throw into coverage. And we know certain quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers are turnover reverse and stuff like that. But -10, or a +10 fumble differential is I don't know that I've actually seen more of a fumble differential in a long, long time. Each turnover for me is 3.5 points. That's 35 points if they have a flat turnover differential, considering all the other stuff that I talked about. And I did think that the AFC and the NFC West would be a little tougher. The Trey Lance, you mentioned that. Yeah, I was really neutral on that, because Trey Lance had one meaningful game in 3 years going into that particular job. And I thought San Francisco would start slow. The Rams were what I thought they would be. And yes, I was out on a limb on Seattle. I did like Seattle this year, but I didn't like them, to be world beaters or anything. I just liked them to win 7-8 games or something like that. The problem with Arizona is they had to play in that division. They had to play the NFC West. They had a couple of other tougher opponents than one would think. The defense I didn't like, that fumble ratio. So I had a game plan that I wrote up. Under 9.5 wins was the opener. And typically you get and openers change really fast now in the NFL, especially when you see, okay, they had you think of it for the common person who doesn't do all this research. They say, oh, the Cardinals won 11 games. They're not going to be as good next year. But now they have 9 home games instead of 8 because the NFC has 9 home games. Sure, they can win 9 or 10 games. Well, that's not the way we saw it. That's not the way people who dig deeper saw it. You had them for 8.5 wins when that total opened for 9.5. I had them for 8 wins. And so I hit the 9.5 and I hit the 9. And I also made a note when they're favored to go against them. And I also said to myself, if it looks like I might lose a game or two early in the year, be patient, because every single year, Cliff Kingsbury tends to be figured out by the end of the year, or Murray, like in this case, might get hurt, or something might happen that way. So I had a particular game plan. It sounds like you may not have had then any season futures on them. Either way.
No, I did not. I regret, this is the one I regret the most. Looking at the Kyler Murray situation, the fumble luck, the fact that I thought the Rams were going to be good and the Niners with the best coach in the league.
Yeah.
I kicked myself. I did well in season win total 6-2-1, but this was one of them I left on the table that, I was spooked and just didn't think it through enough. There was a lot of warning signs on Kyler Murray and his attitude. That Cliff Kingsbury is really a great offensive coordinator and possibly a poor head coach. I knew that Steve Keim built this team incorrectly. I knew that J.J. Watt was just a matter of time that he gets frustrated. So, yeah, this is one that I certainly regret not playing. I think next year is going to be an interesting look, and I'm looking forward to the number for next year for sure.
Yeah, we all have one or two regrets. I had one in a recent show that I did, not fading Green Bay and stuff like that. So I understand that. Before we talk about the actual season and thirds, you brought up Kyler Murray. That whole contract thing before the season started with the language that you have to study the playbook and all that. Boy, did that send all kinds of messages around the NFL. For me, it certainly wasn't a positive. I tried not to factor that in because actually I'd already had my plays in before that came out. But in retrospect now, kind of weird.
Super weird. You can't do that with your star player. You're playing with fire there. What kind of you understand this day and age in the NFL? These players have agents. They have powerful media that sides with players. They hate the media hates the owners. They want the players to make all of the money if they could. You see it all the time. Pro Football Talk. It's all over the place. And then they say, basically, you're an idiot. Quit playing Nintendo and get over here and watch the film. How insulting is that to do that publicly almost? And I don't even know if it's supposed to be public, but that just showed it was just the yin and yang of what you do with the contract. You give him the contract, but say this. It's like, do you believe in him enough to give him a contract yet you have to put in his contract he has to watch film? I mean, that is just the epitome of control. It's authoritarianism. It's crazy how they did that, but it just started this team off on another bad tangent. And another reason I'm kicking myself, Ron.
Well, if you're going to pay a guy 200, north of $200 million or whatever the contract was, boy, you shouldn't have those doubts about somebody that they're not going to study the playbook. If somebody's not studying the playbook, I'm not paying them 50 million, much less 200 million. But they start 2-2, and that's where my quartile goes. Chris and I, Las Vegas Chris and I, we've talked about that. Others have talked about it. When do you roll over and accept 2022 stats as opposed to what you knew from the past? And for me, it's 4 games. And after those 4 games, Arizona didn't look all that good. They had 4 defensive sacks in the first 4 games. And their pass defense, another area they pay a lot of attention to in the NFL, almost 7 out of every 10 passes, 69% of their passes were complete. Of course, they go one and the same. If you're only sacking the quarterback once per game, you have more time to throw. You have more wide open receivers. But they were 2-2, and I thought they were not a very good 2-2.
No, I didn't think so either. I knew they were fraudulent when I actually got lucky on a bet against the Raiders when they were just getting their butts kicked, and then they came back because of Kyler Murray's legs. I'm like, whew, that's not going to happen again. Is the way I was thinking. Then they lose to the Rams by 8 at home. I don't believe they covered because the perception of this team was an above 500 team. And then they go and beat Carolina, which I was a little bit higher on Carolina at that point anyway. I was Carolina was kind of my dark horse in that NFC South division, and man, was I almost right about them and the Saints. But then they play Philadelphia, which, Philadelphia was undefeated by then. Then Philadelphia only wins by 3 points, and that was a home game for them still. But, then you're like, well, can they turn it around? Then at Seattle, they lose. They beat a New Orleans team without a quarterback completely. So that was just another weird situation. I was actually surprised that the defense didn't hold up. But then, the Vikings lost, and then Seattle, and then they beat a bad Rams team at that point. The Rams were toast. Then just all those losses in a row. I mean, you got to understand that this team lost 7 games in a row. It took me a while to kind of get them to the bottom 4 of my power ratings, which is where they ended. They were the 4th worst team on my power ratings at the end of the day. So the last third of the season was just completely quitting, and Kingsbury, even though they wrote that in the contract and embarrassed Kyler Murray, that doesn't mean it wasn't true. There's truth to that somewhere, I mean, and so it blew up. I mean, it's all roses when you're winning, and then
of course
they're probably best friends at the beginning of 2021 season, but then, it's just all different when it's not. And so we'll see what this new regime can put with Kyler Murray here. And they don't got a lot of cap space right now to fix it.
Yeah, season ended for me on November 6th, as far as Arizona was concerned. They were home to Seattle. And I was like you. I actually lost a game playing on them against Minnesota because I thought Minnesota was a fraud. They were a fraud, but obviously Kirk Cousins and everybody had time to throw against Arizona. So I lose that game. I have 3.5. I say, well, that's fine. They could lose by 3, but they lost by 10. But when they lost to Seattle, 31-21 at home, and Seattle then completes the sweep on them, and they drop to whatever their record was at that point, 3 wins, right in the middle of their losing streak, or toward the end of their losing streak there. That was pretty much it for me. I knew the season was ending at that particular point. 16 sacks for, 25 sacks against, no spark, no Kyler Murray after that. So their offense wasn't going to score as many points, or they weren't going to pull games out at the end. And like you said, the writing was on the wall all the way through. And here we are at the end of the season. Now they're back down to that fourth place schedule. And you were right. They actually had a 2nd place schedule coming into the season. They were ahead of San Francisco. So all that just led to just a disastrous season. And now we begin the house cleaning. So the house cleaning begins. And I will say this about Steve Keim, the GM. I think he made the wrong moves, like you said, but I think he got what Kingsbury wanted him to get. I think he got the players that fit into his system. Andy Isabella, who is a failure in the NFL, at least to this point, was somebody that seemed to be perfect for Cliff Kingsbury's system, and he wasn't. Rondale Moore kind of fits his system. The 2 linebackers that they drafted seem to be run-around guys who can make plays and stuff like that. I think he was catering to Kingsbury, and it cost him his job.
Well, yeah, definitely. I know Kingsbury wanted flash, but when you have Rondale Moore, when you have it was Isabella, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
I know that they didn't have DeAndre Hopkins for a while, but you got to wait that out on some of your backups. It's almost a blessing to get your good receiver healthy after the first 6 weeks. You're not risking them there. I mean, going for Marquise Brown just for the beginning of the season still didn't make sense to me, and they lost capital from it. And their defense, they got Zaven Collins, which I did kind of like. I believe he came from Tulsa, and I really like that pick. It turns out maybe he was just a little too small for inside linebacker because they just got smoked against the run. They have no good nose tackle or 5 technique, 3 techniques or anything. they're just a mess, and I don't even know if it's all just their players. It's also their defensive schemes. I thought they were running was bad. And
yeah.
They tried to make it better for Kingsbury, but it was just all empty because the teams knew what to look out for. And it was kind of to spy Murray a little bit and don't let him, he's going to roll out. He's not going to be a pocket passer. And if you prepare for that correctly, and, watching the film of the end of 2021 season, you see what to do. And they're going to be in a little trouble coming up for this year as well.
It's early, so I don't have all the answers. So I'll turn to you for some of the answers. This coaching staff, I haven't done my research on him, but we know about Jonathan Gannon. He comes from Philadelphia. He's gonna get some bad vibes because Philadelphia lost to Pat Mahomes. I will tell you this, a lot of people lose to Pat Mahomes, so let's not hold one game against him. They have a new GM. I don't know as much about him. He comes from Tennessee, which was not a fantastic drafting organization, so the jury's out on him. Nick Rallis from Philadelphia is their linebacker coach, is the defensive coordinator. Drew, Pedsring, Cleveland's quarterback coach. What do you know about these guys?
Not a lot. And nobody knows a lot about them. And here's, it's nice that you defend and say, yeah, everyone gets beat by, the MVP of the league, Patrick Mahomes. But the Eagles had an easy schedule. When they stepped up in competition, teams scored some points against them. The Lions put up 35 against that defense, and that was the first game of the season, They kind of caught the Cardinals in a bad spot, and they barely got through that game. It wasn't really their defense's fault so much. They got the Steelers when the Steelers were still trying to figure it out before midseason. They played the Texans, the Commanders. They lost to the Commanders. The Commanders put up 32 points. The Colts were in absolute disarray when when Jonathan Gannon got to play him. The Packers put up 33 against them. Their offense just outscored what they had to do, scored 40. The Titans, the Titans week 13, okay? We don't need to say much about that. The Giants, obviously, very injured team. That was a pretty good defensive stance. The Bears actually got sneaky on them and only lost by 5 points. And then the Cowboys scored 40 on them. Now, this was without Jalen Hurts, but still, this is finally the formidable team that you play this whole season. That's a playoff team, after all the ones I rattle off, and you get 40 scored against you. I don't think that Gannon was that good of a defensive coordinator. And, I looked at Gannon's history. He was with the Atlanta Falcons back in 2007 as a defensive quality coach, and he was with the Falcons for years after that. And it's not really the best place you want to learn is on the Falcons. He was Titans for a little while, but then he was on the Vikings from 2014 to 2017. That wasn't a good Vikings team at all. Then he was on the Indianapolis Colts as a defensive backs coach from 2018 to 2020. Well, the Colts were okay, but I think their defense was the issue back then. And then he's got the easiest schedule in the league with the Eagles, and I just went over exactly what happened. So the thing that got me is that he was schooled by Reed, and it was basic stuff. Let's move the whole offense to the right and have the guy wide open on the left. Well, the guy was wide open on the left, scored a touchdown. Very simple. Mahomes went down the field. He had no good stunt blitzes for this situation to get. I thought the Bengals' defensive line was a lot better than what their defensive line showed, trying to get to that quarterback. So I am not high on Jonathan Gannon. This offense coordinator they hired, you didn't even know how to say his last name, Drew Pedsing. Now, I'll say one good thing he did. He was the quarterback's coach in the Browns, and he got Jacoby Brissett started off well. I will give him some credit for that, Ron. But you have to understand, this Browns team minus the quarterback was stacked in the beginning of the season. People
That's
were betting over on their win totals. People were, expecting them to be a playoff team. They're expecting the Steelers to be the bad one. They had all that money tied up in their offensive line, defensive line. They have some good receivers there. I just think that he was in a good situation and they still couldn't really get over the hump. Now, he wasn't the offensive coordinator, but now he's coming to Kyler Murray that is in a different situation than Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett, yes, man. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting paid a lot. Yes, sir. You tell me what to do. I'll jump. I'll high. Go to Kyler Murray. Sorry, I'm making $200 million. This is a completely different attitude you're going to, and you're not proven. So you have a young coach that didn't go for the experienced offensive coordinator. I don't like that. You're young coming up into this. I am a very pessimistic Bears fan, as you know, and I've bet the under on them many times. But if you gave me even on who's going to win more games next year, I would pick the Bears at least right now before I would go with the Cardinals.
Okay. Well, you make a lot of great points, and it's going to be a fascinating study this offseason. It is for me. I have to dig deeper in these guys. I need to see what they look like, what schemes they run. In order to try to play kind of neutral with this team and going in with an open mind, there's multiple talent on both sides of the ball, I feel. They have that young tight end that's just going to get better in McBride. Right now, they're sitting with both wide receivers that are among the top in the league. They have to get a little bit more consistent on the offensive line. The offensive line coach is going to be very important for them. They have to get more of a pass rush. They have Simmons. They have the other guy that we talked about drafted. They have a couple of guys in the secondary. I just think if they can coach a little bit better defensively, maybe they do get better, but does it take more than a year because these guys are so young and new to their jobs? It's going to be a roller coaster ride. And then we have one more thing that we have to throw in the mix. And this is for you, Kyle, or Kiev. Sorry about that. I'm saying Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, he's not ready yet. He's not going to be ready at the beginning of the year, is what I'm told, with his injury. So they're going to have to deal with him being less than 100%. What's his, do we even know his timetable for return without Kingsbury in the building? Is this going to be just an awful start? What are we looking at as a fair assessment of where they could be in September action?
Kyler Murray might not play till mid-season.
Yeah.
If things don't go well, you've seen players miss. Look what the news is on the 49ers quarterback, Purdy. Now he might be missing the whole season next year. I mean, it was a serious injury, and I'm guessing Colt McCoy. I don't know too much about that kind. They had a couple guys in the back, and it was David Blow, I believe, was one of them. It's probably Colt, but he's signed through this season, only a $3.5 million cap hit. I don't think he's going to be demanding any more money. I don't see any other teams that's going to really be jumping out for him. But, the problem with Murray is he might not even play. And that's why I think that this Cardinals team has a legit shot to be the worst team in the league this year. And it's hard to say that, but I mean, you got to look at the situation. I think the Rams get back to something this year, and they have a better coach. The Rams have a very good coach, as we know. They were just taking a year off, celebrating the Super Bowl. Why not? You got the best coach in Kyle Shanahan in that division. You got Pete Carroll that was just nails this year. I mean, this is a very tough division again coming in my opinion. And it's looking really tough for them unless they fix the offensive and defensive line significantly and get that scheme running. I mean, well-oiled machine. Can a new coach and new coordinator do that, especially at this age? I'm going to lean towards the no right now. And of course, we could be wrong, but I put percentages on things, and then I put numbers on my percentages. And when it comes to when I'm doing my season win totals after this draft, I might be one of those that would be fading this team, Ron.
Or they have what is it, the third pick in the NFL draft?
Yeah, they have the third pick, which people are saying they're going to go Williams or Carter, which is kind of like what the Bears need. The Bears will probably trade with the Colts, I would think. Maybe the Texans make a move to go up. I think it doesn't matter. I personally would go Carter because last year they did draft, and I'm going to pull up my notes. They drafted edge rusher last year in Cameron Thomas. He didn't really turn out or anything yet. Myjah Sanders as well. So it's like, they missed on it. Are they going to go swing for another edge? I say take care of the run first. Edge rushers have to be proven. I think defensive tackles have a better way of, coming in and making a bigger impact off the get-go. If you can't stop the run, it doesn't matter if you have a pass rusher, in my opinion. So I think you should start against the run. But their offensive line's a mess, and they only have $13 million in cap space right now, Ron. That's very low. I think they're going to clear some cap space. You got some contracts there. I don't think Marquise Brown, is that going to be a dead cap hit? I need to look this up again, of $13 million. That's a lot of money, $13 million for Marquise Brown. Zach Ertz is a big one as well. I don't know if they save much if they cut him. Only maybe $2.5 million off the cap due to his guarantees. That's where they got to look. Robbie Anderson is one of them that's probably going to go at $8.8 million. So they'll save some cap money on that. They're going to have to get some money, and they're probably going to be able to work their ways up to maybe 30 or 40 million, I would guess. But they need to spend that on the offensive line and defensive line. Hope for your cornerbacks to come through the draft.
Yeah, those are positions, I would concur with you, have to be handled. It's interesting. It's a tale of two teams when you look and see what happens with new coaches. Denver has a new coach. They lose early. They lose ugly. Clock management terrible. The coach is gone. And then you have a situation like the New York Giants or even Minnesota. They win all these close games and the players buy in. It's going to be really fascinating to see what happens in Arizona. One of the things I'm going to look for, you mentioned that they could be one of the worst teams. What does that September schedule look like? I know it's early, and I know people who are watching this say, wow, they're already talking about the September schedule. But that's just the way my mind works, because if they get behind the eight ball a little fast and they're losing these games to quality teams, if their schedule is rough right away, there's not going to be that kind of buy-in that this young team, what looks like a young coaching staff that's going to learn on the fly, they're going to need to have some early success, not only in August, but in September. I'm just telling you, that's one of the things I'll be looking at as far as the Arizona Cardinals. What's that early schedule?
Yeah, I know. But even if it's relatively easy, if they lose close games, then it gets harder. It's like, I almost would think that having the harder games early, but they're going to suck anyway, and maybe they can get better throughout the season, might give them a better chance. That's the way I look at it personally. So, the schedules aren't out obviously yet. A lot of the knowledge is there where which team's playing which conference, and that they're going to have a fourth place schedule. At least they're going to get teams like the Bears, then they'll get teams like the Falcons, and hopefully they'll be able to, win one or a couple of those at-large games at least. That's an important thing to consider.
Yeah. What I'll also be looking for is when's that first bye? When's that early bye? Because new coaches, they don't have enough time to process everything and make adjustments if they have that late bye. Late byes are killers for new coaches.
Yeah.
Kiev, closing comments. What would you like to add? We covered a lot of ground with Arizona. Anything else?
No, I mean, I think that this should be a lesson when you're in, for myself, factor in fumble luck a lot more than you should. And it's not like they can't get lucky again next year. They're just not going to get as lucky as plus 10 like we saw this year. I think I learned some lessons myself. I'm always learning as a sports handicapper. I learn it every day and every year, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. I think that we also learned, and I relearned, that how important it is to develop your interior before you can get players to buy in, because losing really messes things up. And Cliff Kingsbury still might be in Thailand drinking a few brews on the beach out there.
Yeah, he's paid well to do that, and Thailand's a lovely place. So, Kiev, thank you so much for joining me for this preview and review of the Arizona Cardinals. The process continues. I have a few more teams still left to get to all 32. It's just something that's so important. I never want to overreact during the season. Do the best work before the draft and in August and early September before the season starts. And it does pay off to look at all these different angles and so on. So I know you're busy, Kiev. I'm sure we're going to hook up at some point, either draft time or preseason and stuff like that. Talk more football. I know you've got basketball and everything else as well. So thanks for joining us. If you joined us, or if you're reviewing this, not in the late night, but in the leisurely weekend, hope this was helpful to you, and thanks for watching. We'll see you down the road.
Thanks for having me.